ramble on my story.
Well, hey there, Samantha. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I'm so excited to have you, and I'm going to turn the mic over to you, let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. I love sharing my story. It's kind of, we have that mission. So I like to talk a lot about like what it's like now because I will go on a ramble with my story because it's very long, but I'll try to touch base a little bit about what it was like. But now today, I am in the 12 step program, so I regularly attend AA. I chair meetings. I do a ton of service work. I have a sponsor, my sponsor has a sponsor, and I have sponsees. So for me, I think the biggest piece was finding what service work meant to me in sobriety. And I think that's really important piece to do, when it comes to recovery. And so I don't want to get coffee ready and move chairs around and stuff at meetings. So for me, I work with a lot of nonprofits too to help like women who reintegrate after prison, who are trying to get sober, or I do work with like I go into the juvenile detentions, I go into the county jail, and I chair meetings. And there is a need for that. So I always like to tell people that, like, don't think that you can't do it, and don't think you can't do it if you're a felon. So I petitioned, and I was able to do that after having being a felon. So they want felons actually. It's interesting.
Hmm.
So, because we get it, I guess you could say. But so that's kind of service work I like to do for me. I am very in touch with a higher power. That took a long time for me. My I had 13 years sobriety and I relapsed. So the first 13 came really easily for me. I was done. So I didn't really have to get into that higher power piece, but what it was like. So my story a little bit. Um, you know, I had more God signs, I would say, than I can tell you about like this is going to be a problem or it's a problem. So the first time I drank was in seventh grade, no aha moment. Eighth grade, I got arrested on a school field trip for smoking pot. Lots of community service in and out of my childhood because of just getting in trouble all the time. I kind of had this mentality of living life on the edge, do whatever I want and get fucked up. And I cuss, sorry. Um, so that was sort of where that went. But, freshman year, I was pretty out of control. I was doing a lot of drugs, drinking, all those things. And eventually, trying to really get this condensed, I eventually, you know, um, got my act together or learned how to manipulate my parents and do all that the best that I could to get away with whatever I wanted. I did really well in school. I was an elite athlete. I was the number one rower in the varsity eight for junior and senior year. I was a state swimmer, but I also knew how to party really well. I got that type A, kind of always had various jobs, always wanted to make a lot of money to make sure no one else was taking care of me. That was kind of like I remember from fifth grade wanting to just get out of my house and out of my parents' like control so I just worked and made money and saved money. And we looked really good on paper. We were one of those families, but there's definitely as I really done some deep work in my recovery, that there's a lot of emotional stuff that I never really processed till way later in life. I went to University of Michigan, drank a lot freshman year. I was always a blackout drinker. Eventually, you know, stopped. It was not working for me. The little drugs, the more normal drugs that are accepted, were just not my go-to. Junior year of college, I went out to LA, and that is when I got introduced to. I had gone through a really really horrible breakup, and I was hanging out. My friend from high school that I visited was gay, and so for the first time in life, I had real friends. So gay men did not want anything from me but a friendship, and so I felt very very safe. However, they party a lot. Not all of them, but they party. The ones I was around, shall I say. And that's the first time I tried GHB, and that was like my first love, right? That was the aha that most people got. And then shortly after that, I tried meth and ecstasy and ketamine, and I found my perfect cocktail. The first weekend that I tried meth, I overdosed and was in Cedar Sinai. So like it was a lot of my firsts I got in trouble for, or something serious happened. And after that, I was gonna stop, but I didn't. When I used meth, it was like I felt completely leveled out. I felt like everything was just normal for me. Like I could think, I could read a book, I could study. I I was 110% self-medicating for ADHD, that I was diagnosed with as a child, but never. I think I just did so many sports, I was able to manage it. Um, and then shortly after that, I started taking drugs back to college with me, and then I would take them back, and then I go out to LA, get drugs, come back. And after college, I moved out there and decided I was going to help actually launch a liquor that out in LA. My job fell through, and that is when I decided to buy two turntables and become a DJ. And so that was sort of my plan. I felt like there weren't a lot of female DJs, and I did it and I did it well, but I also, at this point, my addiction had gone. It was like a full-time job, and I started selling drugs to pay for it when I was out there. And as an entrepreneur, that grew rapidly. And then I eventually decided I'm going to sell to, you know, a few people a lot of drugs. And that's what I did for a while. I'm trying to do this like really a short version. Sorry. See, I told you it's like I don't know how to keep this one short. I'm leaving a lot out, but this is in a nutshell how I got where I am.
Yeah, so it sounds like you used
Go
12-step
ahead.
program to get sober initially, and I'm really curious to if you could share a little bit more about what that was like, like that first year
Sure.
or so, and like what it's been like for you, now that you've been, you're a woman in long-term recovery.
Yeah. So I ended up eventually, I mean, a lot of legal shit, but I ended up checking myself into rehab, and that's when I got introduced to the 12-step program for the first time. First time I went to a meeting, I 110% felt like I was completely at home. They got me, you get a lot of that, a lot of that all that aha that I can relate to you, all those stories that are highly relatable when you're in recovery. And for me, you know, I think I learned how to realign my moral compass when I got into recovery, and to, learn how to make big girl choices again. And at first it was my worst, my best decision was my worst. And that's kind of what I flew by. I realized very quickly I was powerless and my life was unmanageable. That wasn't a hard one for me when we're going through the 12 steps. But being able to, take an inventory of my behavior every day, I think is key for me when it comes to like working my program. Being accountable for what I do on a day-to-day basis. Even today, I do it every single day before I go to bed. I try to do an inventory because I still have character defects. They're always going to be there, but I'm able to recognize them, and I want to like grow. I think that there's a lot of people who get into recovery that don't see the bigger picture of recovery, and that is that you can become like one of the most amazing people in the world if you want to put the work and do the hard work. This past year, so I had 13 years in relapse, and a big part of it was I didn't tackle the mental emotional part of my trauma, and I kind of just was floating through. And I did that this past year. That's all I've done is work and go to therapist and work through trauma and go through the steps and then go through the steps again and then get another sponsor and learn more, and the fellowship, and go out with people and listen to what they're saying, and listen to what they're saying about my behavior and calling me out on my shit is super important. And I am in a better place than I've ever been in my entire life. you know that guilt that comes with like the what you've done in your recovery, the wreckage of your past. So
Wow. Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that and for being so vulnerable. It takes a lot of courage for us to share so honestly and openly with others about, some of the most personal parts of our life. So I really appreciate you. And I know the audience does too. And um, I think what your story really highlights is that, we never really arrive. I mean, there's some definitely progress that we make. Obviously, when you were sober for 13 years, you weren't just sitting around not changing. You were growing and doing things and running your life. But then, like there was a part of you that just wasn't quite healed yet. And I'm curious, and you don't have to take a long time, and if you don't want to, that's fine. But I'm just curious if you would be willing to share kind of how did you know, like what was going on for you around that time, that 13th year, that sort of
Oh,
led into like the relapse and like the triggering of those old traumas, just in a
yeah.
general way.
So for me, I was in a marriage that was pretty toxic. But I didn't, for me, that chaos was still normal, even though I knew it wasn't healthy, because it's what I had when I was in my addiction. And I felt like I could, handle it. And a lot, once you start getting married and having kids, you cannot handle it. So what happened was I started going through fertility treatment,
Mm.
and my obsessive compulsive brain and that addict brain started to just manifest. That's all I can think of, is it just started. I was in a pretty traumatic relationship. He had 23 years sober and he relapsed, and started using when I was pregnant. So he started drinking and using. And maybe he got sober at 16. And part of me, for me to take responsibility for my part, I think that the disease being cunning and baffling, I probably should have shut it down, but I didn't want to, because I just wanted some sort of release in my mind, and I was banking it. Like
Yeah.
every time he got fucked up, I was banking my card. So like, okay, I'm going to be able to do this after I have this kid, because I ended up getting pregnant. And just I mean, I was in prison for 2 years, and I tell people that fertility treatment was harder than that. Like going through that and having zero control and the unknown and the emotion. I can't even describe it. I would not wish it upon anyone. But it started there, and then I had my kid postpartum, infidelity in my marriage. I am not very maternal. So for me, the whole mom thing was really hard. It still is really, I have a very challenging kid now on top of it. And so all it took, it's like that. So that's why I help a lot of women in like the mommy wine culture. Like it's so important, because it's insane. Is I was in a breastfeeding class, and one of the women said to me that, and I was having trouble breastfeeding, and she said, just drink a glass of wine. And I was like, oh, all right. Like it's been years since I've done this. And I ran it by my parents. They're like, well, just do it. Because, they knew that alcohol and drugs were the same thing, but it'd been 13 years, right? We kind of, like, nothing bad had happened. And so, you know, there we go. That's when it happened.
Okay, that's so interesting. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that. And I bet you there's a lot of other people who can relate to very similar stories. And you're right, the motherhood journey is, I would say, not for the faint of heart, right? It's a lot. And even though we are, kind of biologically wired to do this, it doesn't prepare you for not only just the emotional toll and tax it takes and energy to raise children, but also just the physical changes, the financial impact, and also just the world that we live in. We're not doing this in a vacuum, nor are we doing it 100 years ago when things may or may not have been simpler depending on who you talk to. But we're doing it in a society that has its own um, struggles, right? And
Yeah.
so it is a big deal. It is a
Yeah.
big deal. Um,
I don't know. There needs to be, I don't know. I feel like there's no book on it, but I didn't read a lot of books, and maybe I should, maybe I should have,
well, there are a lot of
but
books on it.
I
There are
know,
a
like,
lot of books on it, but the problem is you
It's
have to pick
overwhelming.
out what works best for you and your family, right? So,
Yeah.
the what to expect when you're raising a toddler book might really work for you, and there's things in there that might really work, but then that doesn't fit into your like cultural norms of your family or whatever you were raised in. I don't know. There is a book. My husband used to say we have three older kids are 2018 and or 2019 and 16, and um it's like really no joke raising young people, and it's kind of worse at this stage just for a lot of reasons.
Oh,
But my husband would say we went through some pretty traumatic times for about 4 years. We were in like crisis mode raising those teenagers, and he would say like, no one tells you this. I'm like, oh no, they do tell you, like they told us, but like you just do it anyway.
I,
You think you're going to
yeah.
be different, or it's going to be better, or I'm fine. um they do tell you. So
I don't know. I don't sugarcoat it. And when people are like trying to procreate, I'm like, I don't, but
yeah.
like, so my child has oppositional defiant disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very, very challenging. It's like I'm living with an abusive relationship that I love the person, but I can't ever get rid of them.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And then I have girlfriends that have their kids that, these girls and social media, and they're like trying to kill themselves and filming it on TikTok. And I'm like, I don't even,
Yeah. It's a tough time to be raising kids, in my opinion.
yeah.
Uh, so, what is it that you have been doing lately? Can you tell us a little bit more about how you kind of got into
Yeah.
the work that you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about it. Let's dive in.
Yeah. So for me, I was sick a lot as a kid. So in fifth grade, I would say I started to have severe stomach problems, chronic fatigue, just like really sick. And, they kept throwing like medication on it and just band-aiding everything. And like, it just never got better. And I just always had like bloating, constipation, diarrhea, was sick.
Mhm.
And this went on for years. You know, it just on and off. It didn't really matter what I did. And after I got out of prison, I became a personal trainer,
Mhm.
and I was working out all the time, right? Exactly what everyone tells us to do. I was counting calories, and I was eating cleaner than I can tell you I have eaten in like a really, really long time. And I felt like shit. I had chronic diarrhea, bloating. I kept gaining weight. Then my periods were like every 2 weeks. And I started to see a pattern with the other women that I was training, that they were struggling too. Like they were doing the right things too. And we weren't getting results,
Mm.
as in like what Shape Magazine and Women's Health tells us to do, right? Just cut calories, and like you can only cut so many calories. And I mean, I was probably in full starvation mode. But I was like gaining weight, and I was getting into the whole holistic lifestyle kind of thing. And I got introduced to a practitioner that said, why don't you run a food sensitivity test with me? I was at like a conference, and I was like, okay, like I'll try anything. And I ran the test, and that like opened the doors for me into what I do now. So I'm a functional diagnostic nutritionist. And so I run like very specialty labs on my clients. And I listen to their story and their health history to come up with like a very tailored solution that's going to actually get them results. So, the food sensitivity test, I mean, I had a ton of reactive foods within the first week. I was sleeping better. My diarrhea wasn't better, but I had also dumped, like, I wouldn't say I lost fat, but I had so much inflammation from the foods I was eating and my gut being so leaky
Mhm.
that I think I lost 20 pounds. Like it was like insane.
Mm.
Like all that puffiness started to go away. And I mean, I tore my gut up between drinking and doing drugs. And that's
Yeah.
my message now, is like, you can heal it. Like I've done it several times.
Right.
So, but you know,
What were some of the foods that came up on that test that you were sensitive to? I'm curious.
um, so it could be, the first one we did, let me think. So I remember it was like spinach, almonds, carrots, and I know those were some of them. So it's like foods I ate on a daily basis. So what happens when you eat the same thing over and over, you create your own intolerance to those foods. So the second I would eat like some carrots and almonds, thinking I'm being healthy, what it would also do is like trigger me, and especially for addicts, this is going to be a stronger a stronger reaction. But what happened is like the dopamine and serotonin receptors would sort of start flaring up because of the inflammation that the foods would cause. And then I would start binge eating. So what happens is when you eat the inflammatory foods, you get that same feeling that you get when you're using.
Oh,
And so I think it's more prominent for addicts. I've worked with so many people at this point that like addicts definitely struggle more with like the binge eating, the sugar addiction, all that stuff, because the second they eat those foods, it's kind of like that familiar feeling that we're used to getting. When I pull those foods out, the binge eating, all of it, almost a majority of the time, unless they have a really severe gut infection, goes away. It happened to me the first time I did. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to eat anything after that. Like I would eat a meal and I keep eating. And I'm like, why am I eating? And I couldn't stop. And the
yeah,
second
that's
I did
really
that
interesting.
test,
It makes
yeah,
total sense too
yeah,
when you explain it regarding the dopamine receptors, because as soon as we do anything that starts to hit those pleasure points, especially if you have addiction history, it definitely can send you down that path, pretty quickly. I'm curious about what you said about eating the same food. I eat the same foods all the time. I'm a same food
most of us
eater.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, but like what you're saying is that's not okay to do.
No, I don't, I wouldn't encourage it. So, um, when you, yeah, so what I do is I have people do a 4 day rotation diet. So that's one recommendation I would say, like with your planning. If you're a very creature of habit and you don't like change, I would rotate your foods by 4 days. So you can eat the same thing all day and then don't eat it, or 24 hours, and then switch it to something else the next day, and then switch it. And you can start that rotation over, but that is going to decrease your food sensitivities like by a lot. Um,
Interesting.
so that's one thing, as I say, rotate your foods. A lot of people eat the same thing every day because they're in fear that if they alter anything, they're gonna gain weight, or they're gonna, something's gonna happen. So we all get into this like fear, with fear of food, like all these like fears around food. It's crazy when what I deal with a lot of my clients, because if you change anything, then because a lot of people are just gaining weight and they don't know why, or they can't lose weight, so they don't know why. So they don't want to change anything, so at least they can stay where they're at.
Right.
Um,
Right, because
it's
they don't
kind of
have the
what I say.
information. So it's really
Yeah,
all about using those functional medicine tools to understand what's going on in your body,
yeah.
because not everybody has food sensitivities, right? And so if
Well,
somebody is eating like the same foods every day, but they're not sensitive to them, they may not be having these kinds of problems. Is that right?
so no, so everybody has food sensitivities. That's a given. However, if your gut is not leaky or you don't have intestinal permeability going on, then you're not going to be as reactive.
Mm-hmm.
So 90, so leaky gut and intestinal permeability has kind of been this umbrella term now. It's kind of like IBS, and it doesn't really tell you what the problem is. So you need to figure out why your gut has become leaky.
Mm-hmm.
And food sensitivities can be a part of it. Medication, alcohol, stress, too much cortisol in the gut, birth control, parasites, candida,
Right.
SIBO, like infections in the gut. These can all do that. So we just sort of start finding the root cause of what's going on. So 99.99% of my clients have an underlying gut infection. We start, or one or more, we start to kind of remove those unless they're exposed to mold or metals. And once we kind of start removing those, we get to the point where we can start healing the gut. And
Mm-hmm.
then if your gut is, if we've done the work, gotten rid of infections, and we've done a lot of work on healing the gut, my goal is to always get someone where they can eat whatever they want and not be like double over in pain or gain a bunch of weight from the inflammation. So eventually you'll have the food sensitivities, but if your gut is healed and your intestinal walls and so permeable, you won't have such a high level of like symptoms or reactions to
Mm,
foods.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like once you've done the work to identify the root cause, and this is so important, everybody. I really want you to like hone in on this because, Western medicine traditionally treats symptoms. It's not that doctors, aren't smart or they don't know what they're doing, but they're not trained in a functional medicine way. So they only know how to treat symptoms, right? And so if you go in and you say I'm bloated or my hair's falling out or I'm gaining weight, they're going to be like, oh, maybe you have IBS, or maybe you have, I don't know what else they might say, but it's not going to be anything related to a root cause. And they're certainly not going to know how to look for or identify parasites or heavy metal exposure or food sensitivities. And so this is one of the problems, especially for women. And I recently had a very, very negative experience with a medical physician, that I've never had before, but it's the story we all hear, right? That we, just we get dismissed and overlooked, and things we chalked up to hormones or whatever, because they just don't know how. They're not trained that way. Again, they're not
Yeah.
bad people, or they're not that they're not smart. They're just not trained in this kind of way. So it's important, if you are having health challenges, I know you'll support this, to find somebody who can practice in a natural way that uses functional medicine to look at where the root cause. And we see somebody like that, and he always says that, right? Like, why is that happening? So it's fine to know that it's happening, but like, why is that happening? And there's always a reason, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's whole body health and wellness. It's usually several reasons. It's not usually one thing. It's always, I've never had a one, like just your hormones are off. It's usually a combination of things. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a time and place for Western medicine, 110%. Like antibiotic use sometimes needs to be used or whatever they need to do, but that those underlying symptoms that like we just can't figure out, and the labs all look normal when you go to the doctor. They're typically, listen to your gut and your body. It's telling you, symptoms are your body's way of telling you something's not right, you know,
Mm.
and then you got
That's
to
so
dig a little
important,
deeper.
for everyone to
Yeah.
hear, that symptoms are your body's way of telling you there's something not right. It's kind of like if your ankle's hurting, or you have knee pain or something. Like, yeah, it might be like age related or something, but like, it's telling you, it's a signal to say like, "Ooh, there's something going on here with a tendon, or cartilage or something, or it could be something else that's creating joint pain." So it's really important to know how to listen to our bodies. And this speaks volumes to, like, just in general, having a high level of awareness of the self, which I think women in our society, particularly if you're mothering, working, managing a relationship, all of these things, it gets harder to do that if you're not being very intentional about it, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's really hard. I still struggle with it, and I feel like I've been doing this for over 20 years, right?
Mhm.
I just I got my hormone test out, and I'm going to rerun all my panels on myself just cuz I've been really stressed out recently, and I'm like, well, things are flaring up. I mean, I have PCOS, so for me, like sometimes that'll flare up, but these are all just, it's you just really got to sometimes take a pause and listen. I think it's important if you're in recovery too, you got to learn to pause. That was a big thing, is I had to learn to pause and listen to,
Yeah,
my,
I
yeah, just,
agree. And before we were started recording, we were talking a little bit about, that kind of magical time around when you've been sober for about a year or so. I always say it's kind of like a great awakening. Your brain is kind of waking up to the possibilities of life, the opportunities that are in front of us. A lot of times we have like a lot of desires in our heart that start bubbling
yeah,
up, and we're like, "Ooh, I want to start a business, or I want to write a book, or I want to, get into a relationship or out of one, or whatever's going on." And a
yeah,
lot of this time period too, and that emotional sobriety work has to include the physical health as well. Um,
hmm,
I don't think I think it's fair to say that we neglect our physical health when we're in active addiction. And so once we get as clean as we're ever going to be, right, which is really 30 days actually, but like after you stay sober for a while, we can start to look at, our physical health, and it's in relation to our recovery, because it does
yeah,
affect our mood and our hormones and our stress and all those things, and the ability to really manage life.
yeah. And I think you hear a lot when people first get sober is like, just don't use, you can have sugar, go have sugar. Like, it's like, I mean, even in the big book, I think there's a page where it talks about like, just have sugar. And I was like, oh my God. But like, that's, it's, we're trying to stay sober, and I think that's fine for a little bit, but I think today's day and age we have a lot more tools that could really help us. And I think the biggest thing I always tell people is to really just start to write, like the people who are in recovery that come to me that are just still not feeling like great, and they feel like it's almost like, why am I like, so I get a lot of like, I don't know, like I'm sober, but I don't feel good. You think I feel better. I felt better when I was drinking, which is not the truth, but you know, it's because their blood sugar, just blood sugar alone. Like if you don't regulate and get that blood sugar in line, like if you can get that in line right when you get sober, that is so important because it's going to help with your mood. It's going to help with your sleep. It's going to help with your weight. It's going to help with the food cravings. Like there's a laundry list of things, that just regulating your blood sugar will help.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
totally agree. And I mean, I get it. And I'm sure you do too. Like in the beginning, even months, to a year, there's a lot going on. Like you might be
Yeah.
dealing with like legal challenges, employment stuff, things with your partner. I mean, there could be a lot of other life stuff that's happening that's really taking priority over your ability to really manage and take a hard look and invest in your health. And so I
Yeah.
get that, but we all have
Yeah.
to arrive at a space where we do take a look at that because there is a direct relationship between what we put in and on our bodies and the way we feel. You just can't, there's just no way around it. And there's
Yeah.
lots of research to support this. It's not just me or you talking, about it because it's our opinion. There's a lot of research to support this. And now we know so much more about our serotonin levels and the fact that most of that, or 80% of our serotonin is created in our gut. And so that alone speaks volumes to where we, particularly as women, need to be making our gut health a priority, because if that is the birthplace and the regeneration of our serotonin levels, which is what makes us feel happy, level, content, manages things like depression and anxiety, then we better darn well be doing what we can to support
Yeah.
that system in our body, right? So
Yeah.
I guess what I would love to hear you say is, if you were just talking to somebody who's like brand new to all of this, you and I are kind of versed in a lot of this language and in the health space. So if you were talking to somebody who was brand new and really wanted to start this process around like, okay, I want to get control of this, I'm ready to do it, what are just like a couple things you would like say to them as they begin this journey of creating a super healthy gut and sending themselves on a path that's going to be really successful in their health?
Okay. Well, there's kind of two routes you can go, but I would say, depending on the investment that you want to make financially is kind of where it goes. But there's so much free health and wellness that you can do. And I think just doing stuff like grounding, so getting outside and putting your feet in the grass for 20 minutes, dry brushing before you go to bed. Because I am big on getting your liver, your kidneys, and your gallbladder and your lymphatic system kind of like draining and detoxing you on a daily basis. Dry brushing, castor oil packs at night are great, just kind of like outside tools. But eat whole food. So if you look at a box and it has something you can't pronounce, don't eat it. You know what I mean? It's like broccoli is broccoli. It's pretty easy. Just make that. If you want a bunch of vegetables, put it in a pan. You know, processed food is just as toxic as a lot of other. It's gonna tear our gut apart. So it's really important. I think eating within 30 minutes upon waking up is really important, and eating every 4 hours if you're newly in recovery. I know there's so much evidence, and we see so many things about keto and intermittent fasting, and if you're new to recovery, I think just keep it simple. Eat breakfast, have a snack, eat lunch, have a snack, eat dinner, right? That is going to help like kind of educate your body on how you're gonna, how your metabolism and how you should run your food through you on a daily basis. If you're not pooping, I would say 3 meals a day until you get that under control is important, because that food will just start packing up. But another big thing is to always eat a protein with your carbohydrate. So never just grab a piece of fruit on it by its own, or just eat a sweet potato alone. Always make sure you have a protein with it and eat the protein first. It's going to be a nice little buffer for your blood sugar. So a piece of cheese, a piece of turkey, a turkey burger, bacon that has no sugar in it. Obviously try to stay away from sugar. Let's see, that's some things I would recommend. As far as like food sensitivities, the only diet that I would really recommend would be like the Whole30. And that is just because it takes out the most common food sensitivities I see on a test, which are corn, wheat, cow's milk, um, soy, sugar, eggs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I agree with you about Whole30. I always talk about that. I love Melissa Urban so much. Plus, she's an
Yeah.
addict,
I know, I
and
found that out. That was so
yeah, I
cool when I
love
found that
her.
out.
And I'm not a big food fad diet person at all, but I
Yeah,
love Whole
I'm
30
not.
because it does take it back to the basics and eliminates all of those things you just
Yep.
mentioned, plus all the processed foods. And it helps to get you used to what it's like to not only consume whole food but make it yourself, right? So there's so much that we can do. And I'm just like anybody else too. We tend to think that it's complicated, or we complicate things or make
Oh
things
yeah.
really hard, or like, oh my gosh, you make your own mayonnaise, like that sounds hard, like, but when in fact it really is as easy as like 3 minutes.
I don't know. I've tried so many times to make it and it's always I still use it, but it's like water. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
I that was just one example,
But
but
no,
just
I know,
being
I'm
able
just
to
kidding.
learn how to
It's not
make
that
some of
hard.
your own food, especially like snacks and things, and it's also more economical. So
Yeah.
I love those suggestions, and focusing a little bit more on the mental health things like grounding. Stress reduction is so huge. We're learning so much more about the stress disorders. I was actually just at my functional medicine doctor, and he was talking about cholesterol levels and showed me like this whole graph about because cholesterol in our country is kind of gone wrong, right? Like it's really not,
Yeah.
like it's not
We
what
need it. Yeah.
we do, and we make 2 liters of cholesterol a day, he said. And like, but if these things at the top of this graph, like stress, hormones, there's a bunch of them listed, are out of whack, then your body's going to hold on to more of that. And so it's not like it's a big heart health problem, it's more of like this other stuff. And when we start to look at those things more holistically, like what is really going on, and that's what I mean about starting to identify the source. Your heart isn't damaged from higher cholesterol. And if you don't have a true heart disease or some other condition, you have to take a look at why is that high and why is your body holding on to it. And then you can begin to work on what do we do about it. And the stress disorders are coming up more and more and more in line with that. And so we got to get a handle on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. And you gotta remember, like any stress on the body, your cortisol is gonna go up. If you have any left, most people are depleted of it. But that stress response puts you into fight or flight, and then you're gonna store fat. So I always tell people when they like have that drink and they're trying to relieve the anxiety of a drink, that actually in turn is going to cause more stress and they're going to hold. So it's like, it's not the drink that's making you fat. It's like the stress that you're putting your body under every time you choose to do that. And we could get into like the, you don't sleep and it's a lot.
And just to mention that too, that sleep, and just most people probably know this, but how important sleep truly is for all of our systems. We
Yeah.
actually are biologically wired to have that brain break during sleep. And when we don't get high quality sleep, it affects so much of our other systems, and it also affects our mood. It's just
Yeah.
tied to all the things. It's like stress.
Oh yeah. And like I always tell people, like, if you're waking up still in recovery too, especially during that 1:30 to 3 o'clock range, that's like when your liver starts to work and starts to like detoxify all the toxins that you take in every day. Just like stuff we can't even control, or just our normal hormones, like
Right.
in our environment. Like you could be sitting in a doctor's office for 2 hours sitting next to a soy candle, like that alone will cause a lot of problems. So like all these things you're just trying to detoxify. If you're still waking up at that time, like as a drinker, most people do every time. But if you're waking up still at that time of day, you need to take a look at like your cleansing pathways. You got to look at your liver, your kidneys, your gallbladder, because they're not functioning on an optimal level. If because your body's going to wake up because it's struggling, it's going through something. It's
Right.
telling you like, okay, this isn't working how it should. You should be able to sleep through that and have those processes happen,
Yeah.
and muscle repair, and like you get into seven
That's
to
such a
10,
good
I tell
point.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I mean, and I know you probably talk about this with your clients as well, but just really learning good sleep hygiene and taking care of yourself helps so much too. Obviously, what's going on inside your body is really important, but do the things that you can control. So to making sure things like your room is really dark and that it's a cool temperature, that you don't have any distractions, being off of your phone at least an hour before, or any devices of an hour before you want to fall asleep, to reduce that blue light. So doing the things that we can do to control a better sleep pattern is really helpful. And then if your body is still dealing with other things, and we can start to layer on, more functional medicine, take a look at your detox processes and where you need some support with that.
Yeah, and I want to touch back on like the mayonnaise thing, like making your own sauces and stuff though. Like it sounds so stressful and like who has time for that, right? But I will tell you that the women that I get to start doing things like that, and they're like busy. Like I have a lot of type A really busy people, moms, like super moms. They feel so empowered. The videos I get of them like making their own sauces and stuff like that, like addicts tend to be a little controlling. I mean, at least I know I am. I will readily admit, like, I have that character defect. I work on it. But to be able to control your food in that sense, to know, is like really empowering. And then, it fuels that desire to do more of that. And I find that then next thing you know, I got these busy moms like making kombucha, kimchi. And like, I'm like, okay, well, you didn't have time to even like eat a bar before I met you. So
Right.
it's cool. Yeah.
You're so right about that. And I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I think that when we take control of our health in these ways, it is empowering, and we learn so much when we do it, and we don't have to know all the things all at once. We're always still
No,
discovering things. You
it's a
are too,
journey.
I am. We're always still discovering things. But as we learn it and start to put in place these practices, you feel much more in control of your own health. Like you feel like,
Yeah.
like I know I can heal my gut on my own. I don't need a medicine. I don't need a doctor. Not that there's not a space for that. But it does build a sense of confidence that you never really had before in a completely different way. And if you do have children or just people in your life, when you start to have that happening to you, you're going to be modeling that for other people and
Yep.
passing that down. When
Yep.
you raise your kids in an
Generational.
environment
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
yeah, when you raise your kids in an environment where
Yeah.
they are asking questions like, well, where is this coming from? Or why is this happening, versus just like go to the doctor and get medicine, it helps them to grow into adults who know how to take care of their own health and advocate for themselves when they really need to. And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people like, you're going to be like, this isn't like, I try to teach them it's a very educational process. It's a long-term thing. You did not get to this point overnight. So I'm going to teach you the tools to be able to do this for the long term. So it might be a short-term investment, but the long-term benefits, like you'll know in 2 years if something gets flared up, oh, I got to run this test.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm going to do, get a hormone test. And then you'll know exactly what to do. Like you'll touch back with me or whatever. And then move forward. But then it's also like it's generational changes. Like you're going to change your kids view on health and wellness. Like I get pictures of little kids eating like smart sweets and like all the sugar-free chocolate and stuff. They're like, my kid likes it too. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Because
good.
it does matter, when we train them up with like in a different way, and their taste buds are exposed to certain things, they're like, wow, okay, I don't need to have fruit snacks or whatever.
Yeah.
I actually can sustain myself. One of my favorite things that we go to a chiropractor here locally who practices a lot of ART, and
The
we've been
best.
athletes our whole life, and my kids are all athletes, so that everybody goes there, and they're wonderful. And one time, a couple of years ago, my youngest, who's now 16, but he was there. My kids were all swimmers too. And he was there for something. And the doctor said, you smell like a Twinkie. And I was like mortified. And my son said, what's that? And I'm like, yes. And he
Yes,
was
I
like,
know, right?
yes, he doesn't even know what that is. I was so excited. And these are the things that light me up, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh no, I love that. Like I have a video of my kid just like he was like, "Can I have that?" It's like a head of broccoli in the cart, just eating it. But mind you, I'm like a single mom. He does not eat perfect. I
yeah,
thought I would be that person, but he also has ODD. So like he's oppositional and defiant to anything I give him. So I'm
yeah,
like, just
right,
whatever.
right,
So
exactly. We do what we can.
sometimes, yeah,
Well, Samantha, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you and talking
yeah,
to you
yeah,
here and sharing so much knowledge and information. I think we could probably do a whole nother hour on
yeah.
just gut health alone, and just different ways of eating. And I know my audience is probably going to have lots of questions. Where do you like people to reach out to you if they have questions?
I am pretty active on Instagram. So CFit Living. So SEE and then FIT and then living. And then www.cfitpt.com is my website. It's like really outdated, but if you or Samantha Lander or CFit Living on Facebook, but if you DM me on any of those, I'll get back to you. I'm sure.
Perfect. I'll make sure I link to
Yeah.
all that in the show notes
Yeah.
below. And again, thank you so much for your time and your
Oh,
expertise. I really appreciate it.
no, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Mhm.